High resistance, exotic coils, and a Serpent Mini. Let's run this at about 1.2 ohms and see what happens. Check it out. Alrighty then, YouTube. Thanks for coming back and watching another review. Well, more of a tutorial today, really. Before we get started, please pay no attention to my mascot back there. My daughter was in here earlier, and she left her little friend, and I decided to let him watch. Anyway, what we're going to do today is take the Serpent Mini. Sorry about bumping the camera there. Take the Serpent Mini, got it gutted right now, and we're going to put a more exotic type of coil in it and run it in a horizontal configuration and see what it can do. I want to see if I can get a kind of a low wattage, high performance vape for the mini mods like the Council of Vapor, Mini Volt, things like that. See if it can be a little bit more battery efficient. Certainly, maybe produce a little bit less heat, more vapor. See if we can find a good balance. Find a magic, balance there. And what I've got here is some of my pre-wound 28-38 gauge clapton. I bought this stuff on a spool. It is a 28 gauge core, 38 gauge wrap. I pre-wrapped a bunch of these with a 3mm inner diameter, and I put the 6 wraps on this. Now, for the purposes of what I'm going to do with the Serpent Mini, this 3mm inner diameter is probably not going to work because those post holes are close enough together that it probably won't work out all that great. So I'm going to do a 2.5mm inner diameter, and I'm going to put an extra wrap on it. And what I ended up with at the end of the day is that. Here, let me wipe it down. Still got a little bit of juice on there. Ended up with that. 7 wraps, 2.5mm inner diameter, 28-38 clapton, twisted on itself. I bought the 28-38 gauge clapton, pulled a length of it, looped it in half, popped one side of it into a pin, and I just held one end and twisted the other until it got a twist in it that looked like something I was happy with. And I cut that length into 2 and started making a few coils out of it. Pre-wrapped a bunch of these so that I don't have to sit there and fool around with that all the time. So what I've got here, instead of a 3mm inner diameter, is a 2.5. It's a little bit smaller, and you can see at that 2.5 it's pretty close to the inner wall here, or to the post holes rather. It's got just enough clearance, 7 wraps, and they're not spaced. And the reason I didn't space these, if you look at the width of this thing, the coil is as wide as the entire post deck. And as it is right now, I've got them kind of bent slightly inward toward the post screws. If I'd spaced that, it would be even more. I would have to go with maybe 5 or 6 wraps, and then I'd get a much more low resistance build. Anyway, not going to bore you to death with that. Get your wire in there. Get your mod set up at about 20 watts, or if you have a coil master, use that instead. And just pulse for a little bit. Even at 20 watts, I'm looking at 5.1 volts. Remember, this is a 1.3 ohm build. I was aiming for 1.2, got 1.3. So the ramp up is going to be a little slow on this at 20 watts. But there we go. Nice even glow inside and out. That's what we want. Let it sit there and cool. And while we do, I'll show you how much cotton I'm going to use. That's it. Just take one of these little strips of your cotton pads. I don't use anything fancy. I bought this bag of this cotton, and I think there were like 300 of the little pads in there or something ridiculous like that. Peel the outsides off, the harder ends. Those don't tend to wick as well, and you're really not losing a whole lot of cotton in the process. Get them both peeled down, and really that's all you're losing there. And you're left with that nice little fluffy piece of cotton. I just kind of tease it out. Until it resembles a little bit of a rectangle, something like that. right? Good enough for government work, right? Anyway, nice and loose all the way through, even if you've got the little missing holes, not a big deal. Then you just kind of roll it in on itself to a nice, loose, kind of hollow-ish cylinder. You can't really see it, and it's kind of whited out. If you hear screaming from upstairs, please forgive. That is the spawn, both up there, conversing with each other in whatever way they do. Twist your one end to something like that. And you got plenty of cotton here, so don't worry about having to do too much of it. Hang on one second. Sorry about that, I'm back, real life. Had to go play referee. Anyway, got your cotton kind of twisted up into a little peak right there. Get it slid through, and like I said, don't worry about rolling up too much of that cotton. I'm going to have to do some of this off camera because it's, well, maybe not. And it's going to be in there something like that. Try to even it out as much as you can. This is tough to do while you're holding it upright. But there you go. Nice little tuft of cotton. Get your scissors, and what I generally do is I line the scissors up right with the side of the actual outer deck. Snip it off. Go to the other side. Kind of hard to do on camera. And snip it off. Get all your little dregs and get them in there. And what you're left with is something like that. Tease the cotton out. That helps get rid of a couple of flyaways and things like that too. And you should end up with a nice little neat bow tie. Something like that. Now, everyone's different. I generally juice it at this point. And the juice I'm using is fairly heavy VG, so it's going to absorb a little bit more slowly. And just get the ends of it wet enough that this acts a little bit like a glue or an adhesive and makes these ends stay where you put them. Don't worry if you're saturating the hell out of this part of the cotton, because it's going to get saturated anyway when you actually are vaping on it. Now, you can use something like this, or your scissors, or tweezers, or whatever. You know, you've seen my Serpent Mini video, and they're easy to build on. Really, really easy. All you got to do is just kind of poke it down, and you know, the Serpent Mini, one thing I've figured out is it's pretty forgiving. If you use a whole ton of wick and it's draping all the way down to the bottom, you're fine. And if you don't use quite enough, generally speaking, you're fine. Let's give it a test fire. Let's give it some more wattage first. 20 watts just isn't going to do it. Let's do 30 watts even, 6.3 volts. There we go. Beauty. And what I like to do is down at the bottom, and that little ring that actually feeds the juice holes, put a little bit of juice, fill it up, and make sure this thing is actually wicking while you use it. And as you fire, yep, it's pulling into the wick just fine, and I just got juice everywhere. And you're good to go. Readjust a little bit, because you know that cotton's only going to stay put for a few seconds. Be careful not to touch that coil. It's hot. Get the top of your tank. I've got a little bit of juice in here, so I've got to invert. And again, this is tougher done on camera than off. There we go. Screw it down. Make sure that airflow control is closed completely off because, again, no juice flow control. And let's top her off. And there are the spawn again. And we have a full tank. Now, ordinarily I would say let the thing sit there for a little while, give it some primer pulls, but I saturated the hell out of that wick, so we don't need to do that. If it makes you feel comfortable though, go ahead and crank open the airflow and give it a couple pulls. I mean, I can taste the juice right now. The wick is that saturated. So we're going to start off at 30 watts again. Nice and low key. Again, remember, this has a hell of a ramp up. So the first couple vapes you're going to get are a little bit anemic, because this is intended to be a low-powered, high-performance coil with a whole lot of metal. That's 30 watts, folks. And it's just really chucking vapor. I'm pretty impressed. Now, you can go high wattage with this coil if you've got a mod that can handle it. The battery that I've got in my eVic VTC Mini is a 20 amp continuous draw. So, I mean, in theory I can go as high as 20 amps, but even right now, 30 watts, 6.2 volts, I'm drawing 5 amps. This thing's waking like a beast. So let's just skip 35. Go straight to 40 watts, 7.24 volts, and drawing about 5.5 amps. There we go, that's better. 30 watts, it was a very slightly bit gurgly. It just wasn't producing quite enough heat to vaporize the juice quickly enough. 1.3 ohm coil, 40 watts, and it's doing perfectly fine. Very slightly warm, but you got to keep in mind, this is a big coil. It's a really big coil, and it fills up this chamber almost all the way to the top. If you look down, I doubt you're going to be able to see it on camera. Clean up some of the goo here. I can actually see the coil right there. Yeah, it's too dark. Anyway, the coil is literally right underneath the catch cup. I mean, a millimeter. Nice thick, dense vapor. Sorry about that. Spawn again. Anyway, yeah, thick, dense vapor. Sorry about that little slip there. And this is at 40 watts. A lot of mods out there. The Council Vapor Mini Volt. I know Smok's got their O-Sub, their R40. There are a couple other mods that they've got out that are in the 40 watt range. You've got your iStick 40. There are a lot of 40 watt mods. Joytech's coming out with their 40 watt version of this with a built-in battery. I'm probably picking one up. The thing looks pretty sweet. It's about that tall, the iStick Basic. Anyway, a lot of 40 watt mods out there, and people get hung up around the idea that I need to push 80 or 100 watts or 120 watts. I need to have a TFV8 to chase clouds, and you don't. 40 watts, I'm pushing out plenty. But this thing will do more. And it's impressive for a 1.3 ohm coil, especially a horizontal one where the airflow is hitting the coil and having to wrap around it to go back up to the chamber. I couldn't get this coil in here in a vertical fashion. It's just too thick and beefy and tall, combination of the two. So let's bypass completely and go to 50 watts, 8.1 volts, 8.09. 6.2 amps. Ooh, that's an angry coil. You hear that, folks? That's the sound of a pissed off coil. That's good. This is probably going to be a little warm for my taste. Good Lord. That is a 50-watt vape, and it is just chuckified. If you're going to be doing this type of thing, if you're going to be building a very high resistance coil like this, and very high resistance now, 1.3 ohms. 2 years ago that was like really low. But anyway, if you're going to be doing that, make sure your mod can handle it, can handle the voltage output. The VTC Mini can handle this voltage output, and the battery that I have, the LG Brown, has a 20 amp continuous draw. Practice battery safety. Yeah, these mods, regulated mods, they do tend to have safety features built into them: over voltage, under voltage, short circuit, blah blah blah, any of that stuff. And that's cool. It's going to keep it from blowing up in your face. That said, don't tempt fate. But 50 watts, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go 60. I don't know how much higher than that I want to go, because at 60 watts I'm pushing 8.8 volts. Right at 7 amps. A little toasty. Flavor dropped off just a little bit. 50-55 is probably the max you want to do with this particular type of coil. Man, this is an angry coil. And it's wicking great. Really, really dense vapor. I'm pretty impressed with that. Let's see what I can do. Yep, there we go. 9 volts is the maximum for this particular mod at 61.8 watts. I'm not going to tempt fate there with that. I'm not going to push it beyond its design limitations. And anyway, at 60 watts, the flavor started dropping off. So let's try right in the middle. 55. 8.5 volts, 6.5 amps. Wow. Warm, a little bit warm for my taste, but surprisingly cool for 55 watts. Not so much my speed though. I'd probably rock this somewhere around 45. 7.68 volts, 6 amps. Yeah, there you go. Flavor's just choice coming out of this thing. And you're cranking all this wattage, 45 watts, through this fairly large-ish coil. It's a lot of metal. It's 7 wraps of a double-wrapped clapton. Ton of metal in this, even though the core wire is only 28 gauge and the wrap wire is 38. It still ends up being a ton of metal, and that's where you get all this resistance. That being said, all those pulls that I had, especially the ones at the higher wattage levels, that's all I've drained of the liquid. It's juice efficient, certainly, and I've been pulling on this thing, there we go, pulling on it pretty hard, and the battery has just barely moved. Granted, this is a 3,000 milliamp hour battery, but with tests that P. Basardo and DJLSV Vapes did, this is more effectively a 2300 milliamp hour battery at higher wattage and voltage and amperage ranges. And that being said, the battery life is fairly impressive with this coil. It does produce a little bit of heat. But the vapor and the flavor are there. Sorry. And that's a way to do it. If you like horizontal coils, this is probably a good way to go with this particular tank and a whole bunch of other tanks that support nice, easy, single coil builds. This tank is just super easy to wick. That's why I like it. Wow. Cloud and everything out. Now, something to keep in mind about this wire. And this is just a clean one I've got here. I don't know if I'm sorry about that. I'm going to be able to focus it in. If you take a look, I mean, it is a twisted braided clapton, and it's got a bunch of teeny tiny grooves in it. Depending on the juice that you're vaping, if you vape like I do, tobaccos, especially naturally extracted ones, it's going to gunk up pretty quick. Easy enough to take care of though. Pull the wick out, dry burn it at 20 watts, boom, good to go. And while you're doing that, just tweak and peak, make sure it's nice and centered, the coil, and that nothing's going to ground out. You're going to go through wicks, you're going to go through coils pretty fast using this particular type of clapton setup. That's just part and parcel of the nature of a clapton. It gunks stuff up pretty quick. Don't know what else to say. It was just something that I decided to try. It worked out really well, and I thought I'd go ahead and give you guys a look at it and see it running at 45 watts. I mean, that's where I've been running it, and I've been happy. Let me pause the video real quick. I'll grab my Council Vapor Mini Volt. I didn't think to have that here with me, and I'll show that to you running on that little mini mod at 40 watts. Hang on. Alrighty then, and I'm back, and here it is sitting on the Council Vapor Mini Volt, and that's kind of a sexy little setup there. I mean, it just really, really works out. I really dig the way it looks. We are running it right now. This is reading at 1.2 ohms, 40 watts. I've got it in standard power mode, or ramp up mode. Let's go to power. 40 watts. I'm maxing out the capabilities of this particular tank, or the mod rather. Let's see what she can do. Nice and cool. The difference between 40 and 45 watts, temperature-wise, is significant. Vapor-wise, not so much. And the flavor is great. This type of build, I'm sorry, my air conditioning is going and it's pushing everything right back in front of the camera. This particular build is really good for this type of battery because it is pretty battery efficient at the higher, claptons are really battery efficient at higher resistance ranges. You do have a bit of ramp up. From a cold coil, if you just fill this thing up and build it, whatever, it's going to be a longer ramp up time, and that's going to affect your battery life the first couple, 3 pulls that you make. After that, once the coil's warmed up, there you go. Nothing else to say there, folks. So, with that, I'll go ahead and stop. August 8th is coming up. Support H.R. 2058, Cole Bishop Amendment. Talk to your legislation, talk to your representatives. Let them know that it's important to you. If we don't voice our opinion to them, they don't have any ammunition to go to the federal government with. There are 3, 4, something like that, lawsuits going, pending with a whole bunch of different plaintiffs bringing suit before the FDA, challenging their authority to do what they did with the redeeming regulations. We'll see where that goes. But as it is, August 8th is just over a week around the corner, and it's coming quick. Things are going to start coming down the pipeline here, and things are going to start changing. So stand by for it. I think that we have a very, very good fighting chance of reversing some of this, but in the meantime, stand by. Things are going to happen, and it's not going to happen before August 8th. Not at this point. So with that, do what you got to do. Do your part. Not blowing smoke, right to be smoke-free, CASA, SAFADA, AMSA. Visit those websites if you do nothing else. Give them your support. Give them a testimonial. Pledge your story to them so that others can read it. People who might be directly hands-on with legislation, with these lawsuits and whatnot. Give them ammunition. If you can afford to donate $1, $2, $5, hell, if you can afford $100, donate it to AMSA. It's completely non-profit and it goes straight to the fight for vaping. Nothing else. That's all it is. It's a coalition of folks that got together, previous organizations, that are fighting for our rights as vapors and for the rights of future vapors. So, soapbox, gone. Flavor, vapor, really good. Nice tank for this type of build. Easy to wick, easy to coil. This is a good setup. And at 40 watts, it's doing it. So, with that, folks, thanks for swinging by. If you like my video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share, and pass the word along. Educate other folks. So vape on and vape safe.